Had a man come and share his testimony. And he had a very powerful testimony. Like the kind that if you're a Christian kid raised in a Christian home like me, makes you think that your testimony is boring. This guy was involved in several different violent crimes and drug trade stuff. And not unlike this area, we had a major interstate, and so a lot of traffic came through, and it wasn't a big town, but big city problems, and he was previously part of it. But he, within about the last 6 months of coming to Christ, his life was just radically transformed. And when he had an encounter with Jesus, it really changed everything about him. He became more involved with his family that he had previously pretty well abandoned, and it was a powerful testimony. And he was coming and asking for prayer as he was hoping he was going to be moving to El Reno, Oklahoma, to hopefully start a ministry of some kind, a Bible study, a church, do whatever he could in his circumstances. The reason he was moving to El Reno, Oklahoma is because he was going to be serving a 10-year prison sentence in the federal prison there. All of the circumstances of his crimes catching up to him were ultimately what led him to come to Christ, and it radically transformed him, but he still faced the consequences of his sin. And he's been there about 2 years now. I don't really have any way of being in touch with him, but I still sometimes am prompted to pray for him, that God is keeping him and that there are real ministry opportunities in that place. The reason I share that with you is because Jacob is learning the same story the same truth that we came face to face with when seeing this man who had suddenly really turned around, but it was too little too late. And that's what we see with Jacob. Jacob last week was terrified because his brother Esau was coming, and he rightfully assumed that Esau was coming to kill him with the 400 men that he had in tow. And then he has a radical encounter with God. And it looks a little bit different for him than it does for most of us. Most of us don't end up in a wrestling match with some kind of angel of sorts, but that's what happened to Jacob. And he learns in a hurry that his trouble is not over. He may be a new man. He may be literally a new person. God changes his name to Israel, one who fights with God, but he still has trouble. His sins and the consequences of his previous sin are still coming to him. Starting in verse 1, it says, "And Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men were with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, and Leah with her children, and then Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." This is the action of a desperate man who's all out of options. There's a very technical ancient Near Eastern term for the type of bowing that he was doing. It's called a "please don't kill me" bow. He really did not have any options, did not have any hope outside of God sparing him this trouble that was coming his way. And this is the action of a man who's desperate and helpless and hopeless and needs to be saved. He's been changed, but the consequences of his sin are before him in a very serious way. And so what we see here is not just that fact that the consequences are coming, but this is an opportunity for us to look and see what it looks like when a person is transformed. Because Jacob is going to be behaving both differently and the same as he usually does throughout the passage. I think that's important for us to see and understand. We can really see ourselves in this story if we'll stop and pay attention. Starting in verse 4, but Esau ran to meet with him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted his eyes up and saw women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. This obviously is a miraculous situation. The last that we know of Esau is that he plans on killing Jacob, and he's had nothing but 20 years to fester on that. And time's going to do one of two things usually. Time's either going to heal or time's going to make it worse. But it's not typically going to stay neutral. And so the fear that it's been made worse has been completely done. God has done something in Esau's heart to transform this. God has answered Jacob's prayer and seen him through this encounter. But at the same time, we see that it cost Jacob something. This whole thing of Esau saying, "I have enough, you really don't need to give me anything, it's okay." I'm pretty confident that's just kind of formal gift-giving flattery type stuff. For example, if someone was to bring you a gift and you said, "Oh, you shouldn't have," is our social convention for that person to go, "Okay," and take the gift back? No. I think something similar is happening here. It would almost be rude for there not to be some kind of thing. It's just like a little bit of back and forth. But in the end, Esau does not hesitate to take this gift from Jacob. And this gift from Jacob, if you remember from last week, was pretty good. 220 goats, 30 camels, 50 cattle, 30 donkeys. I don't know what that translates to in Central Oklahoma money, but I'm thinking it's a lot, like a whole lot. And in fact, an overwhelming gift. And so we see, Jacob he's getting grace. It's also costing him something here. There's not no cost. There's not no consequence to his sin. It's just not his life. Jacob's life has certainly been spared. There's also an interesting phrase in here that I think kind of throws off a little bit. He tells Esau that "I have seen your face," which is like seeing the face of God. If you remember from earlier stories in Genesis, what we know about Esau is his name means red. And he's just kind of this ruddy, hairy, fairly unattractive guy. And so we can be pretty sure Jacob isn't saying, "Esau, you look really handsome here." But what he does seem to be saying, we tend to forget that these chapters and verses were made up by some guy a few hundred years ago. They weren't originally in this thing. And so if you go back into verse 30 of chapter 22, Jacob says something similar. He names the place where he had this encounter with God, Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Now he's seen Esau face to face, and because of the grace of God, his life has been delivered. Jacob is recognizing the grace of God that he is alive today because 20 minutes ago he thought it was going to go a different way. And that's a response that, man, we should learn from. God is faithful, and when things go right, it's not an accident, it's not a happenstance, it's not a coincidence. It's God's grace to us, sustaining us through difficult times. In 32:11, if you want to turn back the page, or at least I have to get it, we see the prayer. Jacob asks of God, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack the mothers with the children. And almost immediately, that prayer is answered. I think it's important for us to realize there is real power in prayer, and that God's grace and mercy can look like something that's kind of ordinary. It can look like a brother's forgiveness. It's also God's grace and mercy to work that forgiveness within Esau. And Jacob is recognizing that here. At the same time, I think it's important for us to recognize that this is a story and not a promise. There is no promise that when we do something wrong, we're not going to face the full consequences of it. That's not the case. God is graciously using this moment in Jacob's life. It's an account of what happened where Jacob's life was spared. But if Jacob's life had not been spared, it's not that God isn't faithful. God would be letting him learn the consequences. Sometimes God spares us the consequences and we get to see his grace. Sometimes he lets us face the consequences and we're going to learn that what we did was wrong. And that's still grace. That's still sanctification. That's God working us out, molding us more into his image. So this isn't a promise. It's a story. It reveals God's grace. It doesn't promise that we're always going to get exactly the same treatment. God doesn't always treat us with kid gloves. That's not a promise. But he does always do what's right. And in this case, what he does and the way that he reveals his grace is by allowing Jacob to live when there seemed to be no other way. This is a truly miraculous encounter, and Jacob recognizes it. So we see God's grace here. Verse 12, then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and their nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, at the pace of my children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house made of booths for his livestock. Therefore he named that place Succoth, which means booth or tent, by the way. There's ultimately going to be a feast in Israel based off of that. This is a strange thing because we've just seen Jacob's life changed and Jacob's life transformed, and then God's grace come in an unexpected way where he's not going to face the consequences of his sin, at least to the full degree. And then the very next thing that we see is Jacob being Jacob. The very next thing that happens is Jacob lies to his brother. And we can make excuses for it. All throughout Genesis, there's been really clear, good, theological reasons. Hey, this family should not go and be with pagans because they're going to be tempted to become pagan themselves. And you could make that excuse for him that he's going, no, God told me to go to the promised land. And so that's what he's going to do. The problem is, number one, there's no real need to lie about it. He's just reconciled with his brother. He's just paid the debt that he owes. He could just say, no, I'm going where God told me to go instead. More importantly, he doesn't go to the promised land. He turns around and goes to Succoth, which is back the other direction where he came from. And so we see very clearly that Jacob is a man that's transformed, that something's new, something's different. But he's also a guy that likes to stick to the things that he knows and do the things that make him feel safe and secure. And he's going to do things his own way, despite the fact that God has been very clear that where he's calling him to go is Bethel. It's kind of head spinning, like, what's going on? Well, then you get to the end, verse 18, and Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. So he didn't spend long outside the promised land, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city, and from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought 100 pieces for 100 pieces of money, the piece of land on which he pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. And so immediately after this little moment of apparent disobedience, the very next thing is an amazing moment of obedience. He finally goes into the promised land, and not only does he make it into the promised land, he buys a piece of land in the promised land. And so if you've been with us all the way from the beginning, God's people owning land in the promised land is a really big deal. And so now Jacob is starting to live out what it is to live in the promise of Abraham, and he has the children, and he has the blessing and a lot of wealth, and he's in the land, and it's starting to look really good. And he even does something that we could easily miss. He calls the place where he stays El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. That's not referring to a nation. That's referring to his new name. The nation of Israel doesn't exist yet. God told him, your name is Israel. This is the first time that Jacob calls God his God. Until this point, every time that Jacob has referenced the name of God, he has called God the God of Abraham, my grandfather, or the fear of Isaac, meaning the God of my father. This is the first time that Jacob actually says God is his God. And you look at this, and it's like, man, such a high moment. Like, this is great news. This is signaling everything that we've been waiting on. It's all fulfilled. He's in the right place. He's done the right things. He's got the right stuff. God is being faithful, and he sees it. He's saying, God is my God. All of this looks great. At the same time, he just lied to his brother and didn't do what God called him to do. And so you look, and it's frustrating. Because you go, is this guy a new creation? Is he Israel? Or is he just the same old guy? And the answer is yes. And by the way, when we look at your life and my life, we say, is this person a new creation? Are they the same mess that they've always been? The answer is yes, if you're in Christ. Martin Luther came with a phrase, simultaneously saint and sinner. We're both. We're never going to be perfect. Not this side of heaven. So while he's frustrating, Jacob is an accurate depiction of what it looks like to be transformed. He's got these high moments where you go, man, things are going right. He's giving God the glory that he's due. At the same time, he's got these low moments where you go, what are you doing? Have you learned anything at all? And it's not just here at the end, it's all throughout. Jacob has these really high moments. The first thing that we see here that changed from last week is when he's making this plan and Esau's coming, he's going, I'm going to send half of my camp ahead of me. That way, if I see him kill them, I'm going to try and run away. That was originally his plan. He still sent the gift, but now what he does is he lines up his family and he goes ahead. And he says, come what may, I'm taking the consequences. He has a new courage that he did not have before he had this transformative experience with God. That's the first, good sign that we see. We also see, and it's in the language that he uses about the things that he owns, that he's had a change of mind. When Esau says, what do you mean by all these people? Who are these people that are with you? Jacob says, He says, the children whom God has given me. And so he's for the first time also really understanding that this is something that God has done in his life. It'd be really easy for him to say, it's my kids. And I could tell you this terrible story about all the bad things that have happened to me over the last 20 years. Now I wound up with these wives that I don't want and all of these kids. But he says, no, God has worked out his purposes. God has blessed me. God has given this to me. And then again, he says it, if you look at verse 11, please accept my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me. Many of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey. He's like a big Christian financial coach. Like that's his thing, And so some of you may be familiar with him, some of you don't. But he says something pretty frequently that I think is very telling and is very similar to what Jacob says about the things that he owns. Whenever someone asks him, how are you doing today? He usually responds, better than I deserve. I think that's a pretty good way of thinking. I'm better than I deserve. I'm more blessed than I deserve to be. Jacob is recognizing that all that he has is a gift from God. And there's a change that has happened in this guy. The next thing that you see that just looks so good, we already kind of saw it, is he's finally in the land, he owns the land, and he names this place, my God. God, the God of Israel. He finally has moved to a point, because he's been transformed, where he's giving God the glory that he's due, and it looks like, yes, this is good. Also, all throughout the passage, Jacob is the same old guy. When he goes out and he has this newfound courage, what takes place behind him is pretty telling of where his mind is. Verse 2, he put the servants with their children in front, low-class people that I care less for. They're going to be in the most danger besides me. Then he put Leah and her kids, and in the back of the pack he put Rachel and Joseph. And so still within his own family, he's showing the same old favoritism that he always has. He's showing that I care about me and what I want. I do not care about all of these people equally, even though they are all my wives and all of my children. Okay, that's pretty messed up, right? We could just name that. That's pretty messed up. And then as we already saw, next thing he's going to do is lie to Isaac and retreat back away from the promised land, even though God has told him to go to Bethel. And finally, when he does enter into the promised land, in verse 18, we're told that he came to the city of Shechem. I don't know about you, but Shechem and Bethel do not sound like the same place. And so even the obedience that we see and want to celebrate because it's good stuff that's happening is actually partial obedience. He sounds a lot like his grandfather Abraham. When Abraham was originally called to leave everything behind and go to the promised land, he did it, but it took him about 20 years. He's just kind of, is he good or not? And it's just, yeah. And speaking of paying for the consequences of sin, by the way, next week, he's going to pay for the consequences of this sin. He's going to pay really, really bad for the consequences of the sin of not going to Bethel where God told him to be. Because he's in Shechem, something horrible is going to happen. And I don't really feel like I frequently want to give a content warning for a sermon, but you might want to be aware of what next week's sermon's about. It'd be a little bit interesting if you want to go ahead and go home, read Genesis 34. It's heavy, and it's very intense, the consequences that he's going to face for this decision. But if we're honest, even those of us in Christ, we look a lot like Jacob. It can be really good one day, 1 hour, 1 minute, and then we falter. I'm depending on God to lead me. I'm being faithful to what he's called me to do, and the next moment it gets scary, and so I retreat. And I'm going to make decisions that feel safer for me, that are not as faithful as they could be to what God has called me to do, but it seems like a better idea to me right now. Anybody relate? Or is it just me? It's probably just me. That's okay. So I'll out myself. I can relate to that. And it's all because, and Martin Luther said it well, we're simultaneously a saint and a sinner. We're not there yet. At the same time, we need to receive the warning of this passage. And I haven't detailed the results of this ongoing sin pattern in Jacob's life that God is going to deal with. But it's going to be terrible. And so there's a warning here for us that for those of us, which is all of us, that find ourselves in this place where we have these moments of faithfulness and these moments of reservation, and it looks good, but it also looks like the old mess. And we're a new creation, but we're still living in the sinful body. There's a warning to be taken from this, because God's desire is not to leave us where he found us. That's very clear throughout Scripture. In 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, we read this, that we, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord who is in spirit. God is transforming us and changing us. He does not want to leave us how he found us. How about this warning? Romans 12:2. Many of you know it. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. Titus is 20 months old right now, and he is coming up with new behaviors every day. And it's hard to follow him and understand everything that's going on. But one of his new things that he's doing is, it's actually Winter's toy. It's like a barn dollhouse, and it's made of wood. And he'll sit there in our living room. He does this with doors, drawers, and anything else like it as well. And he'll open that thing up and just slam it together because it makes a big loud sound. And he goes, pop, pop, for about 30 minutes at a time. And my parents were visiting this weekend, and I've thought about it too, and they're like, isn't he going to mash his fingers? And the answer to that question is probably, at some point. And he's just going to have to learn. Because I can't sit there every hour of every day telling him when he doesn't understand that it's dangerous to slam the door and dangerous to slam the drawer and dangerous to slam the barn together. He might have to learn that lesson by himself. You and I are the same way. God spared Jacob this lesson. It could have been worse than it was. But Jacob's about to have to learn this lesson. There's a lesson coming. Take the warning. It's better to receive God's grace by following in the way that he wants us to than by making our own decisions and facing the consequences of our own failures. Take the warning. John Owen was a Puritan, and he always said, you're either going to be killing sin or sin is going to be killing you. One way or the other, sin is part of our lives. Are we going to be on top of it, or are we going to be behind the eight ball? Because God's grace is going to be revealed, and we're going to learn about it one way or the other. So my encouragement today is take the warning. If you've never been in Christ and you don't know what it is to be transformed, today would be a good day to just pray to God and say, hey, what does this look like to have a life of meaning and purpose? And you've never had that? Jacob's just found that. And man, it's changing him for the better. But he's still in progress. So maybe today you're here, you've been a Christian for 20 years. Some of us that have been a Christian for 20 years have really only been a Christian 1 year 20 times. And we've never really made any progress. Because we do the right thing and we go back. And we do the right thing and we go back. And by the way, you can be a Christian for 20 years and have 20 years of growth and still have this ebb and flow. My encouragement this morning is take the warning. Maybe if we actually believe that God's way is best, our lives would be better. Radical idea, I know. but none of us really live it out as faithfully as we could. So if you're here today, you're either going to be killing sin or it's going to be killing you. And the question I have for you this morning is, what is that thing that needs to be dealt with? What is that thing that's keeping you from doing what God would have you to do? It's better to just deal with it now than to let it get dealt with later. And so my encouragement, if there's an accountability of some kind that you need, and you need to pray with somebody about that, I would love to pray with you. I know there's many other folks in this church that are brother and sister that would want to come alongside you and help you. And maybe there's just something that you need to bring before God and say, God, I know this is between me and you. Help me to mortify my flesh, as Romans said. Help me to live a life that honors you. There's a warning to be taken here. Let's pray.